Let me start by walking you through some of our history. I want to step back and talk a little bit about where we've come. In a famous report to Congress in the United States, Patent Office Commissioner wrote back in 1843, "The advancement of the arts from year to year taxes our credulity and seems to presage the arrival of that period when human improvement must come to an end." Think about this. The Patent Office Commissioner saying to Congress, we're advancing so quickly, we're innovating so much that surely we're going to run out of ideas. We're going to run out of things to invent. Aren't we all glad that wasn't the case in 1843? Look at all the things that have come about since this time. 1857 in England, Sir Charles Wheatstone introduced continuous feeding paper. This was used with sending messages, telegraphs. So prior to this point, the only way to send a message through a telegraph was to have somebody manually type in the words. And a good telegraph operator at the time could maybe 25 words a minute. By recording the information on a piece of paper and feeding that paper into the telegraph machine, we were able to accelerate that from 25 words a minute to hundreds of words a minute. So all the way back in the 1850s, we were thinking about how do we automate processes? How do we accelerate what the human is capable of doing? How do we augment with technology what's possible? How do we then change the way that we communicate, the way we work, change all of these things because we're introducing data and we're capturing it, collecting it, organizing it in unique ways. Jumping forward, in 1942, we get the first computer, the first digital computer, the ABC. 1956, we get the first hard drive from IBM. It's about the size of a modern-day refrigerator. But think how long it would take till those technologies came to fruition. It's only recently that we've started to become comfortable and recognize that everyone is using computers and everyone is using these technologies. It's really been the last 20 years that we've seen this rapid adoption. Jumping forward, 1965, a very influential philosopher at the time writes a series of papers where he compares artificial intelligence to alchemy and argues that it can't even play amateur chess. So in the early 60s, we were using artificial intelligence to solve games of life, to solve games of chess. 1967, Professor Greenblatt at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, writes a chess program on a computer with 16K in memory, challenges Professor Dreyfus to a chess match. He loses that chess match just 2 years after saying these programs can't even play amateur chess. And that's the friction that exists with technology. Some things taking decades to come to fruition, and some things happening very quickly. I like to say that technology moves very slowly until suddenly it doesn't, until suddenly it's upon us. And we've probably all felt that. We hear about these technologies, and yet they feel so far off. We don't see them implemented. We don't see them employed. And then quickly, suddenly, we look around and everyone is using them, and we're trying to catch up. Jumping forward, 1980, McKinsey is hired by AT&T to forecast how many cell phones there would be in 2000. So they're looking at a 20-year forecast, their long-term forecast. McKinsey comes back and says, we think in the United States there'll be 900,000 cell phones by 2000. In the US by 2000, there were 109 million cell phone subscriptions, over 1 billion globally. So think about that the next time you hire McKinsey to put together a forecast for you. Again, we see that technology often far surpasses even our best estimates of how quickly it can be adopted, how far it will be employed. As we move into the late 1990s and the early aughts, we start to replace our analog products with digital ones. We replace analog cameras with digital ones. Analog TVs become digital. We see the introduction of the first smartphone in 2003, the first iPod in 2001. And then stepping forward into 2006 and 2007, we see the next major shift that starts to take place because we start to take sensors and embed them in consumer-facing products. First with the Nintendo Wiimote, which allowed you to move a joystick in physical space and then incorporate that into what was happening in that digital environment. So we were moving things in real time from physical world to the digital world. In 2007, Apple introduced the original iPhone. Likewise, they included an accelerometer in that original device so that you could change the orientation of the screen. That was the killer app in 2007. You could move it from portrait mode to landscape mode. I think it's instructive to look back, again, just 10 or 11 years ago, at that original launch of the iPhone. Here's the New York Times talking about the iPhone. You can see there in the second paragraph, the creation of the iPhone priced at $499 or $599 will not be for everyone. First of all, wouldn't you love an iPhone for just $500? And second, this idea that it won't be for everyone. As I looked out, I saw everybody on their phones before the conference started. And then at the start of the conference, you were asked to pick up your phone and take a selfie. It's become integrated into the way that we operate, the way we think. We're seeing that move into lots of other new directions. So that's the history. That's how we've gotten here. Now what I want to do is I want to push forward. I want to look out over the horizon at some of the things that are coming and the implications that it has for the HR professional, for the HR executive who's trying to lead an organization in a time of rapid change and transformation. Point number one that I'll make, data is defining who we are. I talked about how those sensors were showing up in products in the late 90s and the early aughts, and now we're using that data to define who we are as individuals. This is your average surfer, but you'll notice on the front of the screen a little black box on that surfboard. In that black box is an accelerometer and a gyroscope, the same ones showing up in the Wiimote, the same ones showing up in your iPhone and your other smartphones, are showing up in places like surfboards, so we can measure how fast that surfer is traveling, how high the wave was, where they did their turns, how long they rode. All of that information was already there, but it wasn't being captured, collected, organized. It wasn't being structured. So by putting sensors in that environment, we can then start to capture all of that data in real time and feed it back into that experience and that environment so that surfer could have real-time feedback about their performance. We're digitizing babies. This looks like your everyday onesie that you would put on your baby, but you see on the hip there the little green turtle. In that green turtle, an accelerometer, a gyroscope, the same ones that were showing up in smartphones, the same ones in the Wiimote, same ones that were on that surfboard are showing up here. And it allows us to tell whether the baby's awake, whether it's asleep, whether it's on its stomach, on its back. In that green turtle is a digital temperature sensor, so you can tell the temperature around the baby, and a microphone so that you can pick up all the noise around the baby. Of course, it's Bluetooth enabled, so it sends all of that information in real time and continuous time to your smartphone. So you have all of this information, again, that was already there, but wasn't being captured, collected, organized. You can see the green stripes across the baby's chest. The accelerometer and the gyroscope also connect to that, so you can tell whether the baby's breathing or not. And you can imagine in this type of environment what you might want to see happen should you pick up that the baby had stopped breathing. Maybe lights go on, alarms go off, doors unlock, emergency systems are called. All of these things happening because of data now being captured. It was already there, but it wasn't being organized and structured. So going back for the last 200 years, we've been thinking about how do we capture this data? How do we organize it, structure it, in order to accelerate what we're doing? And we're even using data now increasingly to define us as humans. This is my Twitter profile. And you'll see here that it says my gender is male. So Twitter allows advertisers to advertise to individuals based upon their gender. If they're female, they can send certain advertisements. If they're male, they can send certain advertisements. But here's the thing. Twitter never asks you what your gender is when you sign up for the system. It's using data to define your gender. And you can see here, my profile says, if you haven't added a gender, this is the one most strongly associated with your account based on your profile and activity. It's looking at what I write, how I write, who I follow, maybe the things I talk about. Maybe it's using image recognition on my photo. All of the information that it has available, it's using to define my gender in that system, in that environment. And if it, within a confidence interval, feels comfortable with that estimate, that forecast, that prediction, then it'll allow advertisers to advertise to me based upon that information. So this is starting to show up everywhere. We're using data to define who we are as humans. We're starting to use it in HR functions. So not only are we asking questions, but we're using video analysis to look for some of those clues about whether this is a good candidate or a bad candidate. Not just the answers they give, but maybe their facial impressions on some of the questions. We're looking at other information. In a world defined by data, some of the human skills, the human attributes that we bring to the table become more important than ever. Empathy, understanding, patience, kindness. Those are things that still today are very difficult to replicate in a digital world. And so we start to move those into the domain of humans, and those become ever important in a world where we're defining these environments and these individuals with data. Point number 2, data is empowering a customized, personalized experience. We've all talked for many years about the Internet of Things. I would argue we're also seeing an Internet of Me starting to develop, where the focus is on the individual as a person, as a unique identity. You're seeing this show up in lots of different ways, in lots of different places. We're taking the best of what's happening in the digital world, and we're bringing it into the physical world. This is SK2, cosmetics company based in South Korea. And here they're doing a skin analysis in store so that people who come in looking for certain cosmetics can identify what their skin needs. They're taking advantage of the best attributes of what's happening in the digital world and bringing it into the physical world. So the person who walks into the store has a uniquely digital experience, but they leave with a clear physical product. The lines are blurring between what's happening in the digital world and what's happening in the physical world. And this is playing out in lots of different places. And we're starting to merge this data together. We're blending what's happening in the physical world and what's happening in the digital world. Right now, all of your children are at home playing Fortnite against my children who are playing Fortnite. And they're getting comfortable that generations that are coming up behind us navigating these type of immersive environments where data is laying on top of data on top of data. And they have these immersive experiences that allow them to have tremendous access to information and data about their environment. And you're seeing companies start to use this technology. Here's an example from Walmart that's using virtual reality to train some of their customers, help develop those skills and attributes that they want most, allowing them to practice in the virtual world so that they can execute in the physical world. We're blurring and blending those lines. In a world defined by data, where we're looking at the individual and we're building an Internet of Me, it isn't about titles, it's about skills. What skills are those employees bringing to the table? Point number 3, the interface to information is also changing. You'll recognize the way we used to communicate with computers. We spoke the language that they spoke. We used things like punch cards. Over time, we slowly moved them down a continuum where they start to speak the languages we want them to speak. We add in a mouse. We use keyboards so that we can use the alphabet. We to socialize touch screens. And all of you certainly have seen your children or grandchildren walk up to a screen and swipe right in an attempt to change the channel or to turn off the device. They've become accustomed to this is the way that I access information. This is the way that I interact with technology. Slowly, surely, we're adding in speech recognition and voice recognition. You heard today that you can enter to win an Alexa device. This is the way that we're accessing information, and it's changing not only how we access information, but the type of information that we want to access. So you're starting to see this take hold. And you're seeing it show up, of course, in human resource applications. Here's just a simple example where they've created an automated chatbot environment to try to answer some of those simple questions, those routine questions that you're often inundated with. Some studies suggest that as much as 40 to 50% of the questions that HR executives answer every day are routine in nature. So here's a way of customizing, personalizing an experience, but also scaling it to all the employees so that they can get the information that they need in the interface that they're comfortable with. And the generations coming up behind us, this is how they want to access information. They don't want to talk to you. They don't want to talk to me. They want to be able to go to a digital platform, use their voice, type in questions, and quickly get access to the answers they're looking for. Point number 4, data as a result is making work less linear. We're flooded, inundated with data from a variety of sources. We've got it coming in all different forms from across the organization. And what are the implications for you as an HR executive? It means that you are a data scientist now. Everyone's a data scientist. You've got to start to think about this data and the analytics and what it means for the organization. And as you start to automate some of the routine inquiries that you're getting, it allows you to elevate your own career and focus on things that are of strategic importance. As I look across organizations around the globe, I think one of the things that you will see over the next decade, more pronounced than anywhere else, is that the HR executive will become more strategically minded. As some of these routine tasks fade and they're able to automate some of those things, then they will become more aligned with the strategic objectives of the organization. Point number 5, we're moving from a world of data scarcity to data abundance. And we've seen this time and again as we've moved from a digitized to a datafied world. Think of how many searches we do every day. By a show of hands, how many people have searched for something today already? Most of you. How many of you have searched for something since I've been talking? Don't answer that. We become so accustomed to being able to have instant access to information that we search for things time and again. How many have searched for election results? Look at all the hands. How many of you will search for that same thing in 10 minutes? Right? Because the cost of that is essentially free. And when it becomes free, we do it nonstop. Think of how often we check the weather, how often we use map software to route to locations we already know how to get to, but we still add in that digital piece. Look at what image sensors have done to the camera. Early on, image sensors were expensive, and so we only included one on our smartphones, one on the back, because they were a scarce resource. As it moved from an expensive input to an inexpensive input, we wasted it. We started to include not just one on the back, but one on the front. And what happened when we included one on the front? Selfies, right? You come to conferences and you're asked to take a selfie, and you can win Amazon gift cards by taking a selfie. This is what happens. We take pictures of our food wherever we go. We take pictures of everything now because it's essentially costless. This is a world where we've moved from scarcity to abundance. And as a result, we use it in new ways, entirely new ways, that we would have never imagined just 36 months ago, just 48 months ago. Had you said 5 years ago, when you walk into conferences, the first thing they're going to ask you to do is pull out your phones and take a selfie, you'll say, that will never happen. And already here we are. So think about what it means to move from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance. I want to close now with this final thought. And as it relates to data and this move from digitization to datification, think of what moving from scarcity to abundance means for you. So in terms of artificial intelligence, which is empowered by data, what it means is that we commoditize prediction. We make prediction something that was once scarce and abundance. And so we can deploy these prediction mechanisms everywhere we go, predicting the type of things you're going to search for. Spam filters are a great example of artificial intelligence at work, predicting what's a good email and what's a bad email. And like all technology, think about how early on we didn't really rely on it. It wasn't very good. And we would all go through our spam filters to see what had been miscatalogued and then correct that. But today we just accept it. Rarely do we go into our spam filters. And in fact, if somebody calls me and says, oh, it must have gone into your spam filter, I either one, presume they're lying, Or two, I presume, well, I don't want it if it went into my spam filter, because the technology has improved so rapidly. And that's what we see time and again in technology. It starts slow, and it doesn't work very well. And we say, that will never take over this function of my job. But then slowly, surely, over time, it improves, and we start to use it as if we've always done it. All the examples that we've talked about, searching for information, taking photos, we do that now as if we've always done it. And that's how technology slowly makes inroads into the way we communicate, the way we live, the way we work. So point number 6 is an explosion of data requires entirely new processes, requires an entirely new way of thinking about things. This is Garry Kasparov in 1985. He was 22, 23 years old. He was the world chess champion. And he was asked to play in a chess tournament against 30 computers simultaneously. So here he is walking around the room playing a chess game against each of those 30 computers. He beats all 30 of them in 1985. Leaves that tournament as the world chess champion and 30-0 against all of those different computers. Fast forward to 1996, 11 years later, and he's in a battle against a single computer, barely hanging on, against one computer, IBM's Deep Blue. In 1996, he would beat Deep Blue in regulation play. IBM would ask for a rematch, scheduled for a year later, 1997. He accepted. And this is the way a popular magazine at the time talked about that rematch. The brain's last stand. The idea that if computers could beat humans at chess, it was just one more step along the process of computers fully replacing humans. So they meet in New York City, and Garry Kasparov goes on to lose that tournament against that single computer, IBM's Deep Blue, becoming the first world chess champion to lose against a computer under regulation play. And he would leave that match and start to get involved in something called freestyle chess and free play chess. And the concern at the time was, who's going to play chess when the best chess players in the world are computers? So in these tournaments that he started to organize, you could enter any iteration of humans plus machines. So you could have chess grandmasters enter by themselves. You could have computer programs entered just by their developers, or individuals could enter using both their human intuition as well as software programs. And what they found was it wasn't the software programs that were winning, and it wasn't the chess grandmasters that were winning, but it was the strong amateurs that were winning. It was the amateurs that were using multiple software programs, that knew when to rely on the computer and when to go with their gut. Those were the ones winning the tournaments. And still today, the best chess teams in the world are not computers alone and not humans alone, but humans plus computers. So Garry Kasparov writes about this experience, that weak human plus machine plus better process was superior to a strong computer alone, and more remarkably superior to a strong human plus machine plus inferior process. So it isn't good enough to have great technology, and it's also not good enough to have great people, but you need to have both working together, collaborating in a new world that is defined by data, where you take the best of what it means to be human and combine it with the best of what it means to be a computer, and you come up with an entirely new way, an entirely new process, a superior process to the way we've operated in the past. So as you go out and you think about the implications for your organization, you need to embrace the analytics that are coming as we move from a world of digitization to datification. A world defined by data is to bring with it analytics. You are all, as I noted earlier, now data scientists. And you have to start to think like data scientists and operate like data scientists. At the same time, you need to focus on people, not a message that's new to this audience. The workforce of the future isn't something that's already here. You can't go out and find them. You have to build them. You have to prepare them, especially in a time of such rapid transformation. The idea that you can enter an organization with the skill sets you need and that will be sufficient for the next 20 years no longer holds true. You have to enter into a workforce and continuously develop new skills, new attributes, new ways of operating as that organization shifts and turns in a world around them that's being redefined by data as well. And then building that new workforce. Not just thinking you can find the skills that you'll need, but building it internally from within. And you're seeing some of the brightest organizations start to do this. You're looking at IBM has an automated system that they're using called MICA, which is used to advise their employees about job opportunities within the organization, and also help identify where they might fall short for certain jobs and help them develop the skills needed for those jobs. So automating some of that process so that they can self-serve, but then guiding them, directing them, and supporting them as they start to build the skill sets they'll need to remain relevant to that organization. Again, as I noted, it's not about titles anymore. It's about the skills we bring to the table and the skills that we build over time that keep not only us relevant, but also the organization as a whole relevant. Thank you very much. So we have a few minutes. I'm happy to take any questions if there's any questions out there. I don't know if there's, it looks like there's microphones coming around right here.
Hi, Sean. My name is Vani. I'm part of the HR transformation team in Prudential Global. My question to you is, while we know that now the data is there for us to actually make a lot of informed decisions, but how do we ensure that the quality of data that's coming in is actually right, or what are the kind of checks that we need to do? Because if the source data is not right, then the decisions also might go wrong.
I think that's a very great point, that we have to ensure that the decisions that we're making that leverage data are using data that is accurate for that type of decision. I think this is something that we will work on over the next decade as we try to figure out what data is important and what data isn't important. And you see organizations today who are unsure of this collecting as much data as they can. And I also think that some of this is about culture. Where do we want to use data and where do we not want to use data? And you as HR executives will need to define that culture. Culture isn't something that's bought and installed. It's something that's curated and created over time. And so we can think about all of the places that technology can be used. Right now, organizations are trying out a lot of those, but you as individuals, as the executives leading this charge, will have to define where you want data and where you don't. So for example, image recognition is something that's gotten very good in recent years, and so you're starting to see it employed in lots of places. For example, they have applications that will do image recognition in vehicles to identify when somebody's getting drowsy and prompt them that, hey, you're getting drowsy, maybe you should pull over and not drive anymore. A great application of image recognition. Now imagine we put that in every office, in every cubicle, in front of every desk. And now your employer can tell when you're getting drowsy at work. Is this something we want? Is this something that's coming? Certainly the technology is there, and as it goes from an expensive, scarce resource, it could be deployed widely. There's nothing that inhibits organizations from putting that everywhere. So I think that's where it goes back to HR executives. Is this the culture that we want? Is this the type of environment that we want to foster and create? So that's where HR executives can come in, not just defining what's good data and what's bad data, but also defining where we want data captured and where we don't, where we want to rely on the human instinct, creativity, intuition. Other questions? I think we have a question in the back.
Sean. My question is, how do you see the role of HR evolving? Like you said, all HR will have to be data scientists now. Do you see new roles coming up to manage, say, AI in the workplace or something like that?
Yeah, I see so many new roles that I think could fit within the HR function. So for example, one of the big complaints about AI today is that it's a black box, and we don't know what these algorithms are incorporating, and we don't know always what the algorithms are predicting. So I imagine that we could see a new category arise, something that I'll call the AI auditor. So this is somebody who has maybe some technical skills, can understand how the algorithms are operating, but can also translate that to a broader audience. Maybe it's translating it to the employees, maybe it's even external facing, so they're translating it to the general public, explaining what that algorithm is taking into account and it's doing, how it's using data, what data it's using, and ultimately what are the predictions or the recommendations that it's making. And that's a role that I could see fitting within the HR function, a role that doesn't exist today. I think as some of these routine tasks, the other thing you'll see happen is that HR will become much more strategic in nature. If you look at the C-suite executives that exist, it's finance and it's operations and it's some of these other roles, I think HR will increasingly have a seat at the table in the highest level of strategic conversations about what the future of the organization looks like, how we're going to develop and build this workforce. Especially, again, in rapid change, you're not going to be able to find the employees you need because the jobs haven't existed. You know, imagine trying today hire somebody with 2 to 5 years work experience who's done AI auditing. Well, the job doesn't exist today. And so you're going to have to build that, and you're going to have to identify the right individuals to build that. And so the organizations moving forward are going to rely more heavily on the strategic direction of the HR executive in order to help ensure that they're training and developing the skills that they'll need. Any other questions? It looks like we've got another question in the back. We'll make our microphone runners get some exercise this morning.
Hi, Sean. My question is related to the attrition rate. How do you see the data will play an important role in controlling the same at your workspace?
Yeah, so already you're seeing some companies implement technology to help look at attrition. IBM, for example, I mentioned their MICA platform. They also have a platform that's using artificial intelligence to predict who's likely to leave. And they suggest that they have 95% confidence in those predictions, that with 95% accuracy, they can predict who's inclined to leave the organization. So here's how I can see that type of technology playing out. And here's where the worlds blur between what a computer is doing, what artificial intelligence and algorithms are doing, and what the human is doing. Imagine that we're looking at different sources of data, and we've got prediction mechanisms. And again, this used to be difficult, right? The way we would determine if somebody was going to leave was we had to talk to them, we had to look for signs that weren't always clear, and then figure it out, and then address it. And often we were addressing it after the fact. We would hear, oh, they're leaving the organization, and that's when we were trying to have the conversations. If we can use prediction and recommendation engines that are using data to get in front of that, then we might have an early indication of who's likely to leave. And that allows us as individuals, as that HR executive, to then have those conversations with them early in the process to say, why is it that you might, that you want to leave? What are some of the things that you aren't happy with? What would you like to see change? What do you need? So IBM suggests that they've saved already hundreds of millions of dollars in retention costs and recruiting costs by being able to retain some of these employees that were on the edge of leaving, but they were able to address it early in the process. And I'm sure all of you have had those conversations with employees who announce they're leaving, and you try to retain them, you try to keep them, but they're already too far down the process. They've already made up their mind. there was some time earlier in that process that had you been able to get to them, had you known, you could have had that conversation. And so here's where I think we'll start to blur those lines between what the data tells us and how far the data can go. But at the end of that, you need a human to intercede, a human to step in to have that conversation. And again, that's where those human attributes, those unique human skill sets come in to play. Empathy, understanding, patience, kindness. Those are all very difficult to replicate in a machine environment. And so humans can come in and use those. So those skill sets become even more valuable over the next decade. We have time for one more question. We've got a question in the back.
Hi, morning. I come from the learning and development space, and I work in OD and providing customized learning solutions. My question has to do with OD in terms of in process facilitation. I'm just looking in terms of, is there a possibility that we as process facilitators could get replaced at some point of time or the other? The subsequent to that is there some way that data science can be used and harnessed in making vision statements, mission statements, and so on and so forth? What do you see happening?
So that's a great question. So your question is, can we use the data of an organization to then define some of the attributes of the organization? Things like vision, mission.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think so. I think data reveals things that we didn't know. Where I could see this playing out is the data can be utilized to decipher perhaps what the mission looks like or what the vision looks like. And so this becomes a check for the HR executive and for the rest of the C-level executive team. Is this the mission that we really want? Is this the vision that we really want to embrace? This is what the organization is telling us and what the data is telling us, but is this really what we want? And so data provides another piece of input. But at the end of the day, it is you as the HR executive that's going to have to drive these decisions. So while we can use data to augment our information and augment our process for gathering intelligence, we have to be careful in relegating decisions of strategic importance to machines. We can use them to automate the routine tasks, but when it comes to higher level thought, things that are going to drive the organization forward, that is something that we will, for many decades to come, rely on you as executives and your years of experience and your uniquely human attributes to drive those type of characterizations and organizational decisions. And so use technology where it makes sense, just like in the examples I gave you around chess. Use it to make a better informed decision, but at the end of the day, make the decision that's right for your organization. Thank you very much.